Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles.
The episode is just kind of the finale in general.
But it's not the finale of the show.
The finale of the season finale. Yeah. Feel free to unmute yourselves. And if anyone has any either questions or just initial thoughts about the episode, the finale.
It's a finale to the extent that we had the impression they weren't sure they were going to be renewed for a second season when they made it.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if they knew when they finished this season if they were going to have a second. But they do. They have a second and a third, in fact.
Yeah.
But probably a lot of shows don't know that.
I thought it was really sad that the character Hodaya is experimenting with not being religious, having gone through this whole breakup with this otherwise very ideal potential partner over that particular issue.
Mm-hmm.
So I just thought that was sad. I mean, in many aspects of life, timing is everything. But that just struck me as a moment of irony, I guess, that somehow stuck with me more than what's her name, Yafat, saying no to Nati after all these years of desiring him.
All I'll say, I said the same thing to Rabbi Pernick, is just keep watching the show. I won't tell you, too much one way or the other because I don't want to ruin anything for you. But I think that you're right. The idea that Hodaya has kind of come to this conclusion after meeting with the guy in the cafe, right? That really one of her ways potentially to become closer to God, which is ultimately something that it seems like at least she's interested in, is to be in a space in which she can question more than she can just practice blindly. And actually, that's a scene that I always remember because I actually think it's a really interesting way of thinking about just modern day Judaism in general and how many questions we ask and how we look at Judaism both from the eyes of tradition, but also the eyes of modernity, and wondering kind of where we fit into this larger fabric of practice, but also function in the world. And then in terms of Yifat, anyway, it's a great show. You should just keep watching. It'll be exciting to hear next week what you think.
Yeah, Debbie.
So as I mentioned before, I think that the choice of Ana Efne as the theme song for this show and actually the name of this episode is incredibly important, and it actually reflects what you were just talking about, Rabbi Schatz, that conflict that, you between being observant, but now you want to be modern and this constant, pull on both sides. And I think that's why that song was chosen.
Yeah, I loved that you asked the question in the beginning. I really love this song, but I never looked into it in terms of like why they chose it or if they wrote it for this show. I don't actually know the history of it at all. But yeah, I think that is a theme clearly that's been building up throughout this first season. And I think as we get through the other seasons, you'll see how it then starts to play out. Now that we've been introduced, I know you've seen the show, but now that we've been introduced to these characters, how they then play out throughout the journey that you're describing, for each one of them and their relationships with one another and all of that. Yeah, Steve.
I just noticed, I'm just thinking of the whole first season and this whole thing about leaving to get a fresh start. We have Amir leaving his first wife. We have Yifat leaving Jerusalem, going up to the settlement. We have Ryut at the very end, leaving to go to India. Hodaya, leaving her religion. And the only one that hasn't really left to start over is Nati. He's stuck.
Yeah, he kind of like leaves he leaves what we would expect of him, right? He goes to Aoife and he's like, no, actually, I am in love with you. And right, he pivots away from the typical character that we expect of him. But at the same time, he's exactly the same character, which is, oh, you found someone else who you love. So let me step in now and tell you that I actually do love you because someone else got you first. So now I need to tell you that actually I love you. And, you know, make sure that is something I can play upon. Which
is actually the same thing we saw before. You know, we saw the defensiveness with Nitzan was like, you didn't tell me that Amir and Yifat are together. And he's like, they're not together. And it's sort of like, of course they're together. Right? Like Amir never mentioned it, you know, so theoretically Nati didn't know. But, you know, yeah, it's very in line with all of that. Yeah, Denise.
Well, just talking about leaving and not leaving. When Nati has the chance to come to the US, he actually says, I don't want to leave.
Right.
He has a whole conversation about he doesn't want to leave because he doesn't want to leave his place. So they like made a conscious choice to kind of differentiate him in that way.
Yeah. And just you're agreeing with Steve that there's a lot of leaving from all these other characters, but Nati is kind of the only one who seems stuck and isn't moving away from that. From his own narrative, really.
But I mean, leaving is a sort of a decisive choice, and Nati's sort of notoriously indecisive, right? He's sort of numerous times tried to leave or thought about leaving, or right, thought about making decisions and then backtracked, you know. So,
but going to India is a temporary thing. Hodaya, on the other hand, she seems to want to leave Yiddishkeit permanently. It's like she wants to throw out the baby with the bathwater.
I didn't see that.
You didn't see it that way?
No, I didn't see it that way.
I half expected that she was going to find somebody to give her lessons in how to be Chiluni.
But even that talk with the professor, he's like, you don't ever leave. No one will ever understand you. Like, you're going to feel the rest of, you're never going to feel, right? Like the professor said very explicitly, like, you're never going to feel like a Chiluni. You're always going to feel like they don't understand you and you're translating, like no matter how much you try to leave. So it's interesting that even after that conversation, she still tries. So, yeah, Charisse.
I was going to say that Nati actually does leave. He leaves every meaningful relationship that he starts. So it's not like he doesn't. I mean, he leaves the most, I think, out of anybody in this show.
It's fair.
Interesting.
A fair point.
Well, actually, although he leaves, he actually forces other people to make him leave. He won't actually make the decision himself. He puts people in a position where they make him leave.
Yeah, he pushes people away. Yeah.
That is true. That is true. But ultimately, he gives up and he walks away.
Right.
It's also probably, I like that we're going down this drosh. It's nice that we're all writing a drosh together. It's interesting to me that you probably have to be sure of yourself to leave, right? That it's, if you're going to, if we think back to like Abraham, right? When Abraham is told to go, if Abraham didn't feel roots where Abraham was, it might not have been the same kind of experience of leaving, right? Or the three places that God expresses as the places that are being left might not have been expressed in that way. And maybe it's that Nati doesn't really know what he wants or who he is. And so as you're all explaining, like, he's kind of leaving or kind of pushing people away or kind of making other people leave or making him leave other people. But maybe that's because he just doesn't yet know who he is. And once he's established, he won't leave that piece of him behind so easily. So Eileen had her hand up or unmuted, and then Barbara.
I was going to say that Hodaya's journey, listening to the professor who had a similar experience but said that he eventually found God, may definitely indicate that she will come back the other way after she maybe has a trial with going away from being religious.
Right. It's almost like you get the sense like she kind of wants to find herself, and it's sort of like, I need to make a clean break so that I can sort of figure it out. Of course, anyone who's like lived knows that there is no clean break. Like, there's always connections with other people from your past. But that's sort of, this seems to be the sense, is like, I need to just like, right, she even said when Ifat said something, she responded like, at least at the beginning, I need to be a serious Chiloni. Like I need to be machmir about being Chiloni, and then we'll see what happens after that.
Yeah, Barbara.
I actually understand Nati not being ready for adulthood. He's a young doctor. In the beginning, I think he's a resident, and then later on, I get confused as to whether he's a resident or a young attending. And having been through that a few years ago, I can tell you that many of us are like Nati. We were more concerned about our medical career than in trying to find a mate. And there are doctors, young doctors, that find a mate even in college and come into medical school with their mates. But then there's a large number of us, like Nati and myself. I didn't push anybody away the way Nati does, but I also didn't go after trying to find anybody. Mm-hmm. I wanted my life. I wanted my time of learning that I needed to have as a resident. And in setting up my practice in the beginning, it was important for me to have time to be able to get that practice going before I ever got involved with the guy. Mm-hmm. I actually understand what goes on with the way Nati reacts. Just thought I'd throw that in because of what you said.
Yeah. No, I have many, many, many thoughts about that. But Karen, I'll let you speak.
Is there a difference between religious and observant?
Dale Schatz, that's my dad, loves this conversation. Loves.
It's funny because my dad loves this as well. So it's
then hopefully my dad's not coming. So hopefully your dad is. My dad could have this conversation until the cows come home.
Because wait.
Yes. No, I'm listening. I'm very excited. Yeah, go ahead.
Give me his number and then we can meet for coffee.
Oh, he would love that. Yes, go ahead.
I don't think she's not Jewish anymore or religious anymore. I think her observance and, like he said, the guy in the cafe, just drinking the Kool-Aid, if you will. Just going along with what it is, and that's right. And he was questioning his own space in all of that. I think that's what she's sort of hooked into. So I don't think I don't want to be religious. I think she's finding her way to be religious, but in a different way. And I will stop now.
No, that's great. Yeah, my dad, whenever we talk about this topic and you say something about being observant, or if I write a sermon or anything and it says, and being observant of, or whatever, he goes bonkers because he would agree with you that there is not, if you just say, I'm really frum, right, I'm really observant, that doesn't mean that you're very religious. You could be the most secular person and still practice in a way that feels to you like you're connected to some kind of spirituality and religion and therefore are religious. So yes, I think, again, I don't want to say anything that's going to give anything away because, as we know about series, that you'll pick up on these cliffhangers at the next season. But I think what you are getting at is that which is why Pernick said that she needed to be like a real serious Chiloni. She needed to be really serious about being secular because she wanted to understand what it meant to step away from, I think, both. But you're right that they don't have to be separate and apart from one another. And there are Schatz humans who would agree with you that they can also be detached from one another, and one could be at a higher level than the other. I don't know if Rabbi Pernick wants to say anything about what his dad would say, but you can if you would like.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm just like when my sister became frum in college, and it was like really complicated because she became Orthodox, and my dad's a Reform rabbi, And just like those language thing, whenever she would talk about becoming more religious, like, Dad, you don't get it. You're not, I'm I've become religious. And it's like, well, what are you saying? I'm not religious? Or like observant, so like every word has its own like charged nature to it. It's like Orthodox. You could say I'm becoming more Orthodox, and like that was fine. There was no fighting that. But, I think it's a little overstated. I think when someone talks about being observant, like, we know what they mean. Religious may be a little bit different because people could feel religious and not be observant, but observant.
You can also be observant of things that you and I might not think of as frumkeit, right? Someone could be very observant of a different way of, like Reform Jews could say, I'm extremely observant in spending Shabbat doing this, that, and the other thing that to you and I, who keep Shabbat differently, might not see as the same kind of observance, but it's still an observance. You don't agree?
Sort of.
Okay.
No, I mean, it could be, yeah. Barbara and then Terrell, yeah.
Wait,
Oh, sorry, it was someone else.
I wanted to just add more as a question in terms of Barbara's comment about Nati and the medical training. Is in what ways is it similar to medical training in the United States? I know in Israel, because the vast majority of people do high school, army, and then college, that college is 3 years, not 4. I also think, I'm not sure, that some of what in the United States is a graduate level education, like law or medicine, in Israel might be the whole education rather than like a second layer after college.
Yeah, correct.
Well, I can actually answer that a little bit from olden days when I was a medical student in 1962. And I spent the summer at Tel HaShomer. And then I'll go on to what I was going to comment about something else. In those days, many of my classmates actually only did 3 years of college. I played a little too much bridge, so I didn't have the grades to go in after 3 years. But I got in after 4 without any problem. And I'm a one bitchin' doctor, if I do say so myself. So it didn't hurt my doing an extra year. And in fact, the year that I went, that summer when I went to Israel, I also was part of the time in Europe. And I came back and I took a music class and an art class, things I never would have thought of taking, which broadened me significantly. But when I was in Israel, they had residents in the ophthalmology department, which I spent my time in. They had attendings there. Actually, one of them was a pretty sharp old boy. From what I gathered of the education at that time, it wasn't that much different than from what we did in America. I don't know if it's changed now, but I'm pretty sure if you're going to do specialization, you still have to do it in the hospital and you have to spend your time as a resident. I don't know the years that they spend in each one. I know what they are here in America, but I bet they're not different.
I think what she's saying is that you apply straight, like my friend's son right now got out of the army and is applying straight into medical school.
Right.
They don't do 4 years of bio major or whatever.
You sort of pick
there are medical schools that do that in the United States that do like dual things and get you PhDs and MDs in a very short period of time. But the reason I originally raised my hand was Rabbi Pernick is an Orthodox rabbi, and his constituents are different than what we are at Beth Am, because we're conservative. And conservative Jews are a wide range of Jewry. There's those of us, there are those in the Library Minyan, for instance, I'm part of the Library Minyan, which is a group which doesn't utilize a rabbi, except that we've got more rabbis in it than probably any synagogue in the United States. We've got people like Rabbi Dorff, and lots of really top-notch rabbis that drash for us and really give us good learning. But they only do it because they volunteer on every 4, 6, 8, 12-week basis. They're not forced into doing it. And we have different people davening for us. But we have people in the library minyan who the only thing that makes them different from Rabbi Pernick is that they're sitting in a mixed shul of men and women. That is the only thing. They abide by every law of Shabbos that there is. Then you have people like myself who I now, because I've gotten more religious, drive mostly to get to shul or to somebody's house for dinner. But I'll occasionally do some other stuff. But mostly it's become religious. And then you have other people that enjoy feeling a little more religion, enjoy a little bit more religious service instead of a service with mostly English, like in the Reform synagogues, and they come to Beth Am as well. And they consider themselves to be more religious. Actually,
right. I'm going to just chime in a bit, because I think I'll note that, right, everyone exists on a spectrum, like every synagogue, every community, right? So, like, I'm an Orthodox rabbi. One person who's joining here from New Orleans is a member of my synagogue, and she's a Reform rabbi. Right. So, and most of the other people are members of conservative synagogues or not members of synagogue. Right. So, like, there's a section for everyone. And certainly there's, right. And I think that the point that you're talking about, Hodaya sort of has this feeling of like, I just need to leave the structure as a whole. My dad's here. So we were talking about, the question was raised about observant versus religious. So I said, that's a fun topic for you, but like I think the point there for her was like, I just sort of need to leave the whole religious like structure of, community and of all of that, because, and the person she meets in the coffee shop who says like, I'm more religious now than I've ever been, but it's because I left observant life, right? There's something to that also. For some people, that's like,
right.
But people have their different access points, and for some people, the only way to really access religion is to leave observance, right? Or orthodoxy.
Well, I don't think it matters that she doesn't want to go to shul and she doesn't want to observe Shabbos the way she's observed it her whole life. I don't think she can throw out the feelings that she has for it. And we find out what happens later.
Right. But I agree. I think those are things that are always going to be sort of part of her. There's no way.
You can't get rid of everything.
Let's Barbara, you're lovely, and we're going to call on a few other people just to make sure that we hear.
Terrell had his hand up a while ago. So
okay, Terrell.
So Terrell and then Renee and then Barbara.
Excuse me. So I haven't gone through like straight like going from Reform to being from, but my dad is a Baptist pastor. So for our talk after I converted was much more of like, for him, I completely left one religion to go to another one to be, like I say, more Torah observant than his was. So for me, definitely from my perspective, I'm very much religious and observant. But talking about how fathers view it like a changing, I pretty much went from being not observant of the Torah to being completely observant of the Torah.
Right.
Yeah, Renee.
I think that what she meant is that she almost she had to like jump in with both feet in not believing in anything, because there is a part of her that does feel a connection to Yiddishkeit. And if she didn't leave it all the way, then she would be stuck hanging on to those feelings, and she wouldn't be able to see what not being from was all about.
Yeah. Well, you look like you're pensive, Rabbi.
No. I was going to think, no, you can comment. It's fine.
Okay.
I was thinking of saying something, but you can
go ahead. Okay.
No, I'm thinking of what I'm going to say. You go.
I mean, I just was going to agree in that chime in with anything notable. So.
I just wonder, fine, then I'll talk. I just wonder if what you're saying is accurate in that she's actually looking for something new, or that she is trying to decide if the world that she was living in that became mundane and boring is actually the world in which she would want to live in, right? That sometimes you have to go to the complete opposite extreme to find your way back a little bit to center. And I wonder if she's doing a little bit of that, albeit maybe a little bit later in life than we typically see it done. Like when I was in college, I became very frum and am not part of Aish any longer. So I swung back the other direction, but not as far back as I started. So sometimes you have to kind of work that pendulum to understand where you're going to land a little bit. And if you know nothing about the other side, which for her is, chiloni, right, is secular. She's not even talking denominations. She's just talking secular versus not secular, right? So she wants to go all the way to that side so that she can figure out like where her spot is. I think. I don't know. I mean, I do know, but I'm not going to tell you.
But it seemed like with her, it's the transition when with people, it seems like who are more observant and then question or they're where they are. It seems to be more of a black and white decision rather than other people who want to make changes in their level of observance where it's more of a gradual kind of thing.
Well, again, I think that she grew up in a world that is black and white. And so for her, she can't imagine not living in that kind of world where there is gray, right? She believes that either I'm going to observe all of the mitzvot and have all of these stringencies, or I'm going to have none of the mitzvot and none of the stringencies. And then, potentially she'll find her way back into the middle, or at least a combination of both to feel comfortable. Many hands just went up and very excited about this comment. So, okay, Rabbi Pernick, and then Norm, and then Denise.
Well, and then Rabbi Barbara was also physically raising her hand.
Oh, sorry, I did not see you. Okay, so Rabbi Pernick, then Rabbi Barbara, then Norm, then Denise. Whew, lots of rabbis. Okay.
Okay. All right. That should take about 2.5 hours, right? So I was just going to say that, my experiences in Israel, where for the most part, it was black or white, and they didn't know what to do with a reform rabbi or a conservative rabbi. And I remember when I was in rabbinical school and I had these little kids and I knew I was messing with their brains, and they saw me wearing a kippah and they asked, "Ata dati?" And I said, "Ani dati avalo orthodoxy." Are you religious? I said, "I'm religious, but I'm not Orthodox." And they were like, they were playing with nursery rhymes and all that. They had no idea. But I think a lot of Israelis, and especially when we saw Re'ut or Hodaya, and she's having these discussions, I want to hang out with secular friends. I got secular friends, and I feel like I'm missing out on all these things. And even though it has its challenges, that's part of the idea of certainly reform, and I think conservative Judaism as well, is that there is a way to blend the two. And that's not the way most Israelis have grown up.
Right. Yeah. And I would just add that I think I was going to joke and put it in the chat, but I figured I would explain it anyway instead, that it's conservative and reform and also a liberal modern Orthodox, right? Like even that is not dati enough to be considered dati in Israel, right? So anything outside of that black and white, for which modern Orthodoxy definitely is closer to than the other two movements that you mentioned. But anything outside of that black and white for them is unknowable and hard to kind of fathom how to be part of that world. So I agree. I think she needs to figure out that there is life outside of that black and white, specifically because that's how she's understood her existence up until now.
Right. I mean, I'm sure I've mentioned it here before, but one of my teachers in yeshiva, who's a Belzer Chassid, when asked why he teaches in the yeshiva, he said, look, I'm in a community where everything is very black and white. And when people decide, I don't want to wear just white shirts anymore. I think I want to wear shirts with a stripe. It's like, well, may as well eat a bacon cheeseburger. And he's like, I want to like have a place to send those people to be like, no, you know what? Like, I know people who keep halacha and wear colored shirts, right? So like like you were saying, there's that line everywhere. And so there is that value also, even in the Orthodox world, of like, finding those places where there is what's gray for each community is different. But
so I will point out that the Reform rabbi on the call is wearing a white shirt and you are wearing a blue shirt. So we might need to have a conversation about that. Okay, Rabbi Barbara, and then Norm, and then Denise, and then Rebecca.
So I have had many of the experiences that Rabbi Pernick Sr. has had in Israel, where people would say, "What are you doing here?" And I would say, "I was studying," and then, "Where are you studying? What are you doing?" And you would explain, and then they go, "Dati," but you didn't look Dati to them. And so it was very confusing. But to go back to Hodaya, she really is a seeker, and she's a thinker. You just don't go to Hebrew University and just go there and be in a little narrow box and not think. And she was doing biblical criticism. Hello. I mean, that's a hard thing to do, especially if you've been raised super Orthodox, because it's challenging everything that you've grown up believing. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's surprising that she is at this point. And I think when she met the professor, when he said that he was more religious now, although she couldn't see how she could get there, I think it was a ray of hope for her, that she could see that you didn't have to lose your connection to God. I mean, I think she has a connection to God, but she just isn't in touch with it at this point in time.
Yeah, which goes back
and can't see it for the ways that it manifests itself.
Right. And that goes back to this discussion that we were having, that our fathers instilled in us, this idea of observance and religious, right? Which she is now having this conversation with him about, and he keeps saying, I'm closer to God right now than I ever was as an Orthodox, or he doesn't say the word Orthodox, as a Dati man, as a religious, religiously observant, I'll use them together, person, right? And that is interesting for her to still want to seek him out and seek that out, even though she seems to be stepping away from religion. So I agree. I think she does have that connection to God still. Okay. All right. I'm going to stop. Rabbi Pernick can keep commenting after people. I'm going to stop so we can get through some of these comments. Norm, Rebecca, Denise, Karen, Robert.
I just wanted to say that I hope at some point in one of the future seasons we'll see one of our principal characters experimenting with a farther to the right level of frumkeit, because I think that might prove very interesting in seeing how that affects the relationships with all these other characters, because they're all very close to each other religiously. And I'd like to see that happen.
Yeah, definitely be an interesting twist. Rebecca.
Sorry. I was just thinking that for Hodaya, when she was going to spend Shabbat with her secular boyfriend, and in going through all the preparations for that and explaining to him, okay, and this is for Shabbat, and then the kashrut, and when he was visiting, and here's the dairy spoon, and make sure you use that to stir your coffee, and all the details and all of that. I wonder if that in her having to go through and explain all of that, just the mechanics of all those things, perhaps caused her to kind of, wonder, what is all of this that I'm doing just kind of automatically, if I don't really feel the religiosity behind it. So I think her perhaps having to explain it to somebody else caused her to question it for herself. And then the other thing I was thinking of is that it's really Hodaya and another female character, Rayut, in going off to India, and the way she seems to kind of pursue some things that aren't so conventionally, within her Orthodox community, it's really the women who are exploring things. The closest that any of the male characters come to exploring something different is what's his name, Yochai, in wanting to go with office supplies rather than strictly, doing Torah and Haftorah teaching and all that. So it's that it's really the women that they have exploring the religiosity.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, Denise.
Yeah, so I feel like I struggle with this stuff all the time, which I guess which is why it's resonant as a show. And I feel like, I don't know, it's like so polarized. It's like in the US and in Israel, it's like, or you're religious, or you take halacha seriously, or you watch TV, and there's no fusion here that I feel. And I have a bunch of friends in England, and they're amazing, and they're all like Rabbi Lord Sachs, where they're super educated and they're super intellectual and they're engaged with normal society. They're into sports and they watch The Masked Singer, and and they go to shul every single Shabbos, even if they have to walk 4 miles through hail and mud, which we did, and it was crazy. And but they're into it, and they eat in kosher restaurants, and it's nice. I feel like there's something to be said for that fusion. And for me here, I feel like spiritually homeless. I feel like intellectually and societally, I relate 1,000% to Beth Am. But, people kind of look at me sideways like, oh yeah, that's the frum one, and I'm not like frum, but, there's like that stigma that I always feel. So that's all.
I mean, I think that we each have to find our spiritual home as well as like the halachic home, right? The home that we feel the most comfortable praying in or being in spiritually, or whatever you want to say is your kind of your spiritual home. I don't know what else to call it. That place that you're going to feel comfortable. And I would say to you specifically, I don't think that anybody is trying to say, oh, that's the frum one. After all, if you're in the library minyan, as Barbara said, you're amongst good company. But I do think that there is a way in which we have to sometimes live in a space that doesn't complete us on all of those levels. And trying to figure that out is a journey. And you ask yourself a lot of questions along that journey as well. So thank you for sharing that. I forget now who is next. Karen? Robert.
I think okay, let's go with Robert.
Okay, when I was in Israel about 10 years ago, I took a chance and I stayed with an Yemenite Orthodox family, and it was my first Yemenite Seder, and it was great. But during the Seder, the guy, the father asked me, how do you observe in the United States? So I said, I'm conservative. And he says, and he described, is that like Dati light? So that's the way that a Mizrahi Jew could relate to the conservative or possibly reform movements. That, we do something observant, traditional, but nothing like Orthodox or Haredi, and yet we're not Chiloni.
Right. So there's like Dati light, and there's also Masorati, which is a term that's used a lot, which is different than Masorti. But Masorati is like you have Shabbos dinner at your parents' house and you eat kugel, but like you're still going to watch TV afterwards. Like that's Masorati. Right. So that's also very common. But Dati light is another. Dati light is more like you wear a kippah, but like you're not so careful about it.
And actually, even though Hodaya, was suffering during her relationship with the professor, I'm actually very hopeful. The fact that she's actually took the big step to experiment with Chiloni ideas and people, and try to understand it better by stepping out of her the box that she grew up in. So.
Yeah, Karen, did you have a comment that you wanted to make, or is that no longer relevant? Sorry. I'll just comment on Robert's point. When I was talking with Rabbi Schatz about what to talk about today, now filled.
Now that we're getting to a topic with 4 more minutes.
No, but I mean, it's related, obviously. Like, we were talking about just some of the struggles of, at the end of the episode, and I imagine, again, I haven't seen past this. So I don't know what happens. But that whole scene with Hodaya and Yifat at the end about like living together and all of that. And we were saying, I mean, again, this touches on a lot of the themes that we're talking about. But just like navigating, Yifat's like, yeah, we figure it out. Like you figure out what happens when there's, hair in the bathroom and, like you do like everything that with roommates, you figure it out. And so like, this is the same kind of thing where it's a matter of figuring it out. But it's interesting because it is, I mean, I think Rabbi Schatz and I both have experiences, probably a lot of us do, of experiences of like living with people whose religious observances are not quite in line with ours. I was actually even thinking about it also like just now we're in a world where people are much more, like everyone beyond the Jewish world is much more aware of like the way that their actions impact others who share a household with them. And like the idea of like some people who are more meticulous than others, which often is a challenge in a, kashrut Shabbos setting, like now with COVID. It's like, right, like, okay, we all agree that we're going to do X, Y, and Z, but then there's the one who sneaks around, sneaks in late at night after going to the bar. We're like, so those kinds of tensions are not specific to a religious orientation, but are certainly exist within a religious orientation of, what happens when someone's really, okay, everyone calls themselves frum, but like, one guy, if he accidentally screws up and, sticks a fleishik spoon in the milk pot and no one's around, is just going to stick it back in the drawer because he knows no one knows, right? Like those kinds of things, or he assumes no one knows, right? Like, there's like, I'm sure it'll be interesting to see how they navigate those kinds of tension, going forward. But yeah, Rabbi Schatz, you look like you were going to add something.
Yes. There have been instances in which living with people who have different observances is definitely difficult. And your dad just made the point that, Maimonides has this really beautiful kind of adage that if you're not questioning your faith, then like what kind of faith do you really have? Which is what the professor says about God, right? If you're not questioning what's going on, then how can you say that you're living a life fulfilled and feeling empowered by that connection? Because if you don't have questions, you're just like blindly practicing. When I lived in Israel, my roommates got there before I did, and they were second-year students at a rabbinical seminary, and I was a third-year student, and I showed up, and the first question, we had never met before, and the first question they asked me was, how do we kosher our plates? And I looked at them and I said, well, what do you mean? Like, aren't the plates kosher? We're in a kosher home. That was the whole idea of us living here. And they said, well, we weren't really sure which ones were fleish and which ones were milchik, so we just used paper. I was like, okay, well, first of all, we could call the person who owns the home and just ask. But if we really wanted to kosher them, like, let's go see the plates. It turns out the plates are not kosherable based on their
Are any plates kosherable? I mean, like, unless they're metal, I guess glass plates.
Yeah.
Yeah. Meaning like ceramic, I think of plates as being ceramic.
Okay, so they were ceramic. Yeah. And so I had to explain to them like that we couldn't kosher them and we couldn't do anything with them, and we had to kind of just figure out from the person who owned the place. But it would have been very easy for me to just say, don't worry about it, I'll figure it out. But in that moment of, and they weren't any like less frum than me or whatever, they just had questions that I knew answers to. But in that moment, I also got to teach them something. And I think that for the people that I've lived with who have been less observant or less at least outwardly religious, I have felt like that's the best part of it, is being able to explain why I keep kosher, why I have so many different sets of everything, why I have different parts of a sink. Like those kinds of things have been exciting for me. And there are moments that are difficult, right? If Hodaya wants to live in a place where she can experience what it's like to turn on the TV on Shabbat, it's going to be hard for her to be in a religious household where that TV is in a public space. So there are benefits definitely to living with people for whom you get to ask those questions, like Maimonides tells us to ask, in terms of why is it that I do what I do? It's why I love working with conversion students, because they have questions that I've always taken things for granted. But then there's also just the practicality of it, of if I live in a space that has public pieces to it, how are we going to be able to exist in those spaces? And then one last story that I'll tell you, and then we can go on to more of this topic or a different one. I housed a few teenagers last year. They were doing a Shabbaton in the Pico Robertson area, which is the area sort of that I live in. And part of this Shabbaton was that they were going to be in people's homes where they could walk to shul. It was very important for the school that they not drive to shul, even if that's their familial practice. So I think it was 3 girls staying with me. And at like 1 a.m. on Friday night, I heard them making popcorn in my microwave. And I came out of my room, angry that I was awake at 1 a.m., came out of my room and I said, we have to stop making the popcorn. And they looked at me, frightened because this big, scary rabbi just told them to stop doing something. And I said to them, I don't care that you brought the food into my house. I would have preferred you not to. But what I actually want you to recognize is that you are now cooking in a kitchen that doesn't get cooked in on Shabbat. And do you get why that would be difficult for me? And these teenagers who didn't want to have a conversation with me at 1 a.m. got to understand a little bit more about why that sanctity of Shabbat is not just about not turning the TV on, but it's also about being careful about the spaces in which you're existing with other people who might find those things important. Rabbis, Pernick, any words?
No, Dad, were you going to say something?
Well, I was going to say it would be interesting to find out, and then what did they say once you were gone?
Exactly, right. Yes.
Yeah, they were probably mad, but they didn't make the popcorn,
I'm sure.
So
Yeah.
that's fine.
that's a lot of times when we're learning, and this is true in all relationships, a lot of times people's initial reaction is negative, and then they think about it. And I remember my very first congregation. I was an assistant rabbi in Worcester, Massachusetts, and we had a temple administrator named Harold. And no matter what we asked him, we just knew he was going to say no. No matter what it was, no. Okay. But then he'd think about it and whatever. And, and sometimes it ended up being yes. But I think some people are very open to learning. That's really interesting. Tell me more, Rabbi Schatz. And then there are others who, they have to digest it. And some people just don't want to hear, of course. That's what makes the world go round.
It was interesting for me, just thinking about some of those issues. Like when I moved into Manhattan to start rabbinical school, I moved into a frum apartment that had been, like, the 3 people I moved in with, it was a 4-bedroom, had lived together for a number of years. One had smicha from YU. It was like a frum apartment that they all knew what was going on. They all they knew the drill. And then one by one, my roommates got married, and every year we had to fill at least one spot. And it got to the point my last year where in my mind it was a frum apartment, and by the end, by my last year there, I was now the frummest one there. In terms of observances. And the things were, before it was a whole conversation about whether we can use tap water in the kumkum on Shabbat or not, because Rav Schachter, who's a Rosh Hashiva at YU, says you can't use New York City tap water because of the microscopic insects that are in there. So my roommate, who was, we had to buy gallons of water for the kumkum, for the hot water heater, because that was his chumrah from Rav Schachter about not drinking tap water in New York City because of what are they called?
They're like little microscopic little.
Yeah, I forget what they're called. So anyway, something peds. I can't think of it.
Amoebas?
No, they're not that tiny. They're
No.
they are visible. They're visible to the naked eye. They're just You have to look. You have to be looking for them to see them.
That's why the pizza and bagels.
The bugs, right. Yeah. No, apparently the story that I heard, at least, of how they discovered this
water. We're going down this water rabbit hole.
Yeah, just briefly.
Okay.
So there's a from vegetable brand called Bodek, where everything is grown hydroponically, and so they say it's kosher. You don't have to check the vegetables, right? It's certified kosher, right? And so someone sued them because they said, I had my Bodek lettuce, and even though they say you don't have to check it, I checked it and I saw bugs. They say, well, that's impossible. We grow it hydroponically. There are no bugs. Like there are no bugs in the facility. And so then that was sort of, at least that's the story I heard of how they discovered, like, oh no, it's actually the water supply in the city that has these like these tiny bugs. But anyway, we went from that kind of, from like whether we can use tap water or gallons of water to now like people accidentally tripping up the pots and like all the time. And it's doable and it's right. Bodek means check. Thank you, Dad. But like the whole idea is you don't actually have to check. It's pre-checked, but by pre-checked it means there were no bugs anywhere because it was grown in water. But it's like, I don't know. We'll see what happens with their apartment dynamics. But like having been in numerous different kinds of permutations of that, like there are those challenges of what happens when people commit to saying, okay, this is what we're going to do, but they don't actually care themselves anymore. Like it ends up becoming complicated.
It's also interesting, though, if you think about like living with people who might be on the same, plane as you when it comes to religiosity, that you still have things that you're not going to agree with, or that you're going to have different customs about. Like, do you stand for Kiddush? Do you sit for Kiddush? Do we rip toilet paper? Do we not rip toilet paper? Do we leave a light on? Do we have a timer? Right? Like, even if there are things that you're going to get to the same result, like there are still things that even if you are, quote, from all of you, there are also going to be things to think about. And I think that we've already seen that with Yifat and Hodaya. And so it's interesting that she feels like she needs to extract herself to have an even different experience. And that Yifat is like, we've handled everything else. We'll just handle it. It'll be totally fine. And what she needs out of that, like the space that she needs to be able to kind of figure out who she is, separate and apart from Yifat in that home.
Okay. Very good. Should we wrap it up here?
Thank you.
Okay, great. So we go by Rabbi, yeah, there we go. Rabbi Schatz usually asks all the halachic questions that she gets to me anyway, so it's it ends up being the same answer.
Wait, what was the question?
My dad said, "Do you go by Rabbi Schatz or Rabbi Pernick?" I said, "You usually send me your titles." Yeah, or it depends.
If you're smart, you know the answer to that question, and we don't have to answer.
There's no question at all. I know. But,
every experienced person knows that they have to forum shop and pick which rabbi is going to give the answer they want.
Yeah, right.
That's how I found Josh.
So like whenever people come to me with conversion, I'm just telling you, you're gonna end up wanting someone else.
Go to Rebecca.
Go to Rebecca, right? Exactly. Yeah, Michael. I saw you had a hand up.
Yeah, if I may, I put a question in the chat. If you don't mind, Rabbi Schatz, is your father a rabbi?
No.
Oh, the way you were discussing before, I thought possibly.
Oh, no. He's not. He should have gone to rabbinical school. He actually, at my rabbinical school, you get smicha from a rabbi, and then you're also allowed to have like a sponsor up there. And so he was my sponsor because I wanted him to feel like he was gaining smicha as I was. But no, he's not. He also did not go to cantorial school, though he acts as a cantor for a shul in Los Angeles. So he's one of those. But no, he's very rabbinically. Anything I've ever written that has gone out into the world has been written with or edited by my father. And yeah, he's a wonderful guy, but not a rabbi.
Okay, everybody. I think we'll wrap it up here. Next week, we finish season 1, but unlike with the shows when you have to wait 5 months or 6 months for an episode, we're going to just dive right into season 2 next week.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.